Everybody, welcome back to Late Night Review. In today's video, we will be going over the testimony of Kathleen Sampson, Diane Vandermolen, Charles Wadlington, Meredith Giesler, Marta Menendez Cano, and Stephen Nosner. Kathleen was the cousin of Eric and Lyle Menendez, and she was related through Kitty's side. She went and stayed with the Menendez family one summer and ended up actually leaving early because she didn't like the treatment there. If you remember from the previous video of their cousin Brian Anderson, I think that was the last name, he had described what it was like seeing Kitty go into these like trances where she would like
be standing in an area, spacing on an area and thinking about what, and all of a sudden she would just turn her fist up and she would squint. Her teeth, her lips would go straight. She had perfect teeth, so you could see her teeth would just come out. The veins in her neck would pop, and her fists would be and then clenched, where her knuckles would be white from clenching her fists.
Kathleen described Kitty being angry in the same way that Brian described her. Clenching her fists, like showing her teeth, and just like becoming very angry and like in a trance. Kathleen described that while she was staying there, the Menendez parents yelled and punished her the same way that they punished their boys, which included calling her names. She was asked questions about if she ever saw Kitty showing affection to her boys, and she said she never saw Kitty ever show any kind of affection towards her boys. That the only time she ever saw her even smile was like if the boys had won a tournament or race of some sort. She described this affection as being more of the reward for winning. She also described a time that she and the family went to a swimming pool, and she was allowed to go ahead and go and swim and do whatever she wanted at the swimming pool, but Mr. Menendez kept Lyle and Eric there with him the entire time, and that they were forced to tread water or swim laps for the hours that they were at the pool, and they weren't allowed to just go ahead and go swim and have fun. She also described that like as well as being punished, she was also, Mr. Menendez also controlled what she ate while she was there. So if they went to a restaurant and she wanted to order something she liked, like let's just say mac and cheese, kids, you know they are, he would tell her, no, I'm going to order this for you and this is what you're going to eat. She also remembers the same thing that Brian remembers about when the boys, Lyle and Eric, were punished and sent to the room. She would also hear the sound of the belt hitting the boys.
Where our rooms were side by side, you could hear the belt, because I also received.
Next, we're going to move to Diane Vandermolen, and she is Kathleen's sister. And they both actually went to stay with the Menendez family at the same time, where Kathleen left early because she didn't like the way she was being treated. And Diane, she actually made it through her stay. Diane described her experience being there. She was saying that the Menendez family actually had a maid who would go over daily, and that during the time that she was there, Diane, visiting, they actually reduced the maid's hours to like 30 minutes a day. And she said that she was actually used to do the housework, to do the yard work, to do the garden work, to watch the kids, basically the groundskeeper, the nanny, and the maid. And she actually had to do all this stuff by herself. She was not given any assistance with any of the family members. Miss Bunovich tried to play this off as she was having to do chores and help out, and she was saying that no, this wasn't the same as doing chores to help out. It was what she spent her days doing. Now, an interesting thing about Diane is she actually remembers a time where it was time to go to bed, and Lyle went down to the basement, which is where she was sleeping. I guess there were 2 beds down there in the basement. And she said Lyle went down to the basement where she was staying and asked her if he could stay in the other bed down there, and then pointed to his private parts and said him and his dad touch each other there. She said once Lyle told this to her, she went upstairs and got Kitty and told her what Lyle had said. And Kitty actually went downstairs, down into the basement, grabbed Lyle by his arm and drug him upstairs, and actually didn't ever address anything. She said she gave her like a dirty look, like, you don't know what you were talking about. And she actually began to question herself and say, like, did I just misunderstand that? And then start thinking, like, maybe I did, because nothing was ever addressed about it and nothing was ever talked about it. Miss Bonovich actually objected and asked that the judge impeach her testimony for the molestation, because the molestation, or this account, took place when Lyle was young and not something current. Surprisingly, and the judge said no, because it is relevant and does believe that it was current. So that was actually a surprise to me that he disagreed with her objection. So, I mean, good for him. She also described that Kitty drank every day all afternoon, and actually she would even see her pour alcohol into her coffee in the morning. She said that Mr. Menendez would actually make fun of Kitty in front of the boys, Lyle and Eric, for Kitty's drinking. She also described Kitty calling Eric names, saying he was a baby, and she would make fun of him. Diane described a time where she herself went to comfort Eric, and Kitty said, no, do not do that. He's just being a baby. She said Kitty was not affectionate at all with either of the boys. Diane was also talking about a time that her, Lyle, and Eric were playing a game, and she got tied to a chair. She said that the game went too far and that the boys pulled her shirt off, and she was yelling at them to stop, and which they did stop, but her shirt was taken off and she was in her bra. She also told another story of when her and Lyle were lying down on the couch watching TV. Lyle actually jumped up on top of her at one point and started fondling her breasts. She said she was in shock and told him to stop, and so he did. The next person defense put on the stand was Charles Wadlington, and he was another one of the boys' tennis coaches. Charles said that Mr. Menendez would fight with him about how to coach, when to coach, what to coach, yet he, as in Mr. Menendez, had no coaching experience, and Charles was actually ranked within the top 100 tennis players in the world. I mean, this is the reason why he was hired, because of his skills. And not only was he ranked within the top 100 best players in the world, amongst other achievements with coaching and creating top ranking tennis players. But Mr. Menendez felt he should argue with Charles and tell him what to coach, how to coach. Like, why did you hire this guy if you're just going to tell him how to do their job? He said that Jose actually fought with him for 5 years, and that Jose finally fired him after Charles stood up to him about telling him to, like, basically stop telling him how to do his job. He said that their coaching sessions would last for 2 hours straight with no breaks being allowed, not even for water. Now, this wasn't Charles' way of coaching. This was what Mr. Menendez wanted him to do. He said that these boys were worked harder than any other player he's ever worked with, but because this was at the request of Jose. And so for his description of Kitty, he said he never saw Kitty happy in the 5 years he saw her. He said that if Lyle or Eric ever asked Kitty anything, she would tell them they're stupid or naive. Which seems to be the running thing word-wise that's used in this family. You were stupid or naive or didn't know anything. That was like the words that were always used if you didn't know the answer to something. He also described that when the parents were around, Eric and Lyle would have like no personality, just very quiet. And he said that when the parents weren't around, the boys were like normal, classy, mature kids. So not only did he never see Kitty happy during the 5 years that he worked with them, he also never saw her show any type of love or affection to the boys. He also described that Jose ran the boys like they were a business, meaning he gave orders and they were expected to be carried out. Oh gosh, that sounds a lot like my own father. He said that he worked with the boys every single day before school and then after school, including weekends, holidays, yes, even Christmas. He said he actually observed Kitty being more critical of the boys than Jose was, but that Jose was the worst parent he ever had to deal with. Charles told a story about one of the boys getting an ingrown toenail, and he explained that this is a pretty normal occurrence for tennis players. He himself went to the drugstore and bought this medicine to put on the toenail because Kitty wanted to take him to the doctor and get it surgically cut out of him. But he just felt like that was a bit extreme because he's had them himself and you could just use this medicine to fix this problem. No razor blades needed. Now, when Mr. Kiriyama cross-examined Charles, he tried to spin it to say like, okay, so their mother Kitty wanted to get them medical care. Are you a doctor? And he's like, no, I'm not a doctor. And he's like, so you felt it was better for you to get them a cream than allowing their mother to get them medical care. And he was just like, I have experienced the same thing being a tennis player. You don't need to go to the doctor to get this taken care of. You can just use an ointment. But of course, Mr. Kiriyama was trying to make Charles look bad, but I don't think he made him look bad. I think he just made himself look stupid. Charles came across to me as somebody who really enjoyed these boys. He said they were hardworking kids, but that at one point he felt Lyle's head wasn't in the game anymore. Just saying, at near the end of the coaching with Lyle, he noticed his demeanor or abilities had changed, and that Lyle was actually such a good player. Like one of their last matches with each other, Lyle actually beat him in their tennis match. Lyle he was like out of it and became really annoyed while coaching him and was just like, I'm not going to coach you anymore if you're going to be acting like this. Basically, you're wasting everybody's time here.
Did you think that your remaining as their coach had any impact upon Lyle or Eric's well-being?
Yes.
And what impact did you think your being there had?
Well, I thought it was about all they had.
In what sense? What do you mean by that?
As a friend.
Were you affectionate towards them?
Yes.
And how did you demonstrate your affection for them?
We were friendly, and we played non-tennis things, and we played with the pets. We went fishing. We listened to music. We talked about, girls and life and things like that.
Next on the stand is Meredith Giesler. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Meredith was actually a lifeguard at the country club where the boys used to go swim. Now, Kitty would drop the boys off whenever the pool would open in the morning, like at 10 o'clock, and leave them there all day. Like, she wouldn't come back and check on them, and they were left there until the pool closed at 7 o'clock. And during times when they had like thunderstorms and they had to close the swimming pool, the other parents were there, obviously take their kids with them or come pick them up. And she said that Lyle and Eric would just sit there under like the cabanas by themselves until Kitty showed up to pick them up around like 7 o'clock. And she said this was a very abnormal occurrence. Like, this is not something she saw happening with any other children. It was just them. The ones that went there, like the kids that went to the country club to swim, were all the kids that Lyle and Eric would have been in school with at these private schools. But those kids all played and associated with each other, and Lyle and Eric didn't talk to any of them. None of them talked to the boys. So even though it was both of them, a lot of the time she described that it was just Eric by himself. So though these other kids from their school were there, none of them ever talked or associated with Eric, but Eric was there for those hours by himself. And Lyle would be up at the tennis court doing his practice with the coaches. And whenever he was done with those practices, he would go down to the pool and swim with Eric during that time. She also described seeing Jose practicing with Lyle sometimes and like running him really hard, like Jose was playing against an adult. She said that when she would observe Lyle and Mr. Menendez playing tennis or being coached, should I say Lyle being coached by Mr. Menendez, she remembers Jose always yelling at Lyle, telling him to hit harder or run harder, do something harder. Like, he worked him really hard. And she said she actually never ever heard Jose ever give Lyle any compliments during any of those coaching times. And that after the session of this tennis practice, him and Jose would go down to the pool, but it wasn't to leisure swim. Jose would then start having Lyle swimming laps. Meredith being a lifeguard, Meredith also was the coach for the swim team, which Eric was a part of. She said the swim team practiced every single day for 45 to 60 minutes. And the kids were all like really tired after their practice because it was a strenuous workout. Then she said that after these practices, Mr. Menendez would jump into the pool and actually start making Eric's swim laps. So though the other kids were like really exhausted and tired, their parents took them home, probably to do their homework or something. Mr. Menendez would actually jump into the pool at that point and take over the coaching and start making Eric swim laps. But he didn't just make him swim laps. He went up and down the pool following Eric through the pool, yelling at him to swim harder or move faster or whatever. There was nothing positive he was telling him during these laps he was making him swim. And this wasn't just like, oh, he's swimming laps and he's just yelling at him, go swim harder. She said every time Eric would come up for a breath, that's when Jose would yell at him whatever cruel comment he was going to yell. That's what he would do. The next on the stand is Mariana Cano. And she's actually one of the boys' cousins through the Menendez side. Her mother is Jose's sister. She said that while staying at the Menendez house, she observed Kitty taking Valium every day. And then she asked, like, why are you taking that? And Kitty said she needed to use that to get her through the day. She also described that Kitty was not ever affectionate towards any of the kids. So this is, again, another example of someone saying Kitty was never affectionate towards her boys. She also said that she didn't even know that Eric had a learning disability because the family had actually kept it very quiet. So apparently Eric had a learning disability and he was a little behind. And it was probably because during the times where these kids were being used at all these practices, the parents were actually doing the homework for them to make sure they got all the answers right and correct. And there was this they're just like, how is this happening? Like they're getting all of their answers on their work right, but they're failing all the tests at school. And so then Eric actually ended up needing to, I think, repeat one of the grades. And that was kept quiet because that would ruin their picture of this great, perfect family who does nothing but stride and succeed and have successes. Setting her testimony aside or ending her testimony, we're going to move on to her mother, who is Marta Menendez Cano. She is also a financial planner and stockbroker. And she actually sold a life insurance policy to Jose. She said that her brother Jose treated Lyle way worse than he treated Eric because he saw Eric as like his prodigy, that he was going to be the successful one, that he could work with Lyle, that he could teach him stuff, where Eric was more of like a baby. He cried a lot, just like wasn't as smart or as good, as talented as Lyle was. But despite that, he still treated both of them very strictly. She said that her brother would always call Eric names like sissy, idiot, weak, or a baby. She said that her brother would make fun of Eric and Lyle in front of everybody while the boys were present. And she said that if anyone tried telling Jose anything, he would make fun of them and ridicule them. Like, you're stupid, you're naive, you're dumb, you don't know what you're talking about. She said she also as well observed Kitty using Valium. She said that she remembers Kitty leaving Lyle home sick when he was like 9 years old. She would leave him home sick so she could go shopping. And she knows this because she was the one going shopping with Kitty. And she would be like, hey, maybe we can just go shopping another day since Eric is so sick. And she's like, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. During shopping, she actually wouldn't even call and check on him to see if he was doing, how he was doing. But not only did she just leave him home sick, she wouldn't leave him with any food or with any medicine. It's good that she didn't leave him with any medicine, but she could have at least given him medicine, but apparently she didn't do that. So she was talking and telling the courts about the fact that she was the one that sold the policy to Mr. Menendez, or her brother, and that after her brother and his wife died, she flew on a plane over to LA to go through her brother's office over at whatever record studio he worked at. She was looking for any kind of documents to show the life insurance policies so she could take it to the boys. And she said when she was talking to the boys, she actually told them like they were the beneficiaries of these life insurance policies, and they said no, they're not. Like their dad had taken them out of the will, and as well as being a beneficiary to any of these life insurance policies. The boys didn't believe her, and there was kind of like an argument where she was just like, no, you are. And they're like, no, we're not. But Miss Bonovich was like, well, they were probably just lying because they already knew they were beneficiaries and they were the ones that were the killers. So they were already just lying and acting like they didn't know they were the beneficiaries of these policies. They also didn't even know these policies existed. She also described riding with Kitty in the car and saying how crazy of a driver Kitty was, and that it was a known thing that Kitty was a crazy driver. She said that just because of that, just like everyone else, didn't mean it was easier to ride with her. It was still just as stressful. And that at one point after leaving, I think like Eric or Lyle's, it must have been Lyle's, after leaving Lyle's graduation from high school, she ended up getting in a wreck, and she herself, Kitty herself, didn't want Jose to know this information, so she just told everyone to lie and not say anything. Because by the time they got home, Jose was like, where were you? Why did it take you so long to get home? They were just like, oh, we had to stop at the grocery store, because apparently Kitty said, tell him that we stopped at the grocery store and someone like backed into the car. And so that's what they did. And so, of course, during cross-examination, they tried to say like, oh, so you just lie about things to help out the family. Like, are you lying also to help out Eric and Lyle get out of the situation they're in? And she's just like, no. And they're like, oh, then why didn't you tell the police all this information? And she was just like, the family, she's like, my brother had an image that I was not going to wreck. And at that time, I didn't know all this information, so I just gave them basic information. I wasn't going to be the one to wreck my brother's image after he worked so hard to create what he created. And so then they're like, oh, so it's okay now that you're wrecking his image because you're trying to help out your nephews. And she's like, no, I just think this is a time for this information to come out, because basically these are serious charges. And this is the reality of how dark this picture was. Okay. I think her rationale was rational. Like, why would you just disclose everything about this family just because the police are asking you questions? To me, it only makes sense that it would be coming out during the court process, that you would be getting more information. But of course, the prosecution tried to use that as Miss Cano was lying to help out her nephews. Next one on the stand is Steven Nossener. He was on the stand briefly. He was actually Lyle's soccer coach, and he described Jose as treating Lyle, his words, more like a racehorse than a son. And of course, prosecution did not like that description. He also described Jose again, Jose running up and down the field during the soccer games, yelling at to get the ball, run faster, all this stuff. He was constantly yelling. And he said he didn't like that because he didn't have the kids, because these were kids at the time. He said he didn't like that because he had each of the kids doing different jobs, because that is the way he coached. He said that after the games, the families would stay and like have snacks or whatever and mingle with each other. He said that Lyle parents never kept him there after the game. They just, game ended, they grabbed him and hauled him off. And that sometimes he actually wouldn't even show up to practice or up to games, or he would come in late because he was at tennis practice. And so he felt the parents had other priorities than the soccer. So he was only on the stand for a short period of time. I think he was just used to describe the repetitive behavior we're continuously seeing about Jose running up and down the field or running up and down the swimming pool, yelling at the boys on what to do. Those of you who actually played any sports, did you ever see any parents operate like this? All of these coaches have said they never saw any parents operate to the level that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez did, particularly Mr. Menendez. In the next video, I am going to talk about Mr. Oziel's babysitter, the babysitter he had living with them, obviously to take care of his children, more of a live-in nanny. Yes, Oziel has taken out his shovel, started to dig himself some more holes. So make sure you hit the bell icon so that way you get notified as soon as I upload that video. I forgot I wanted to address this. So this is another example of how biased this judge treated defense, particularly Miss Abramson.
Have left the courtroom. Miss Abramson, you tend to shake your head negatively when the court rules against you.
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
And you had better stop doing that or the court's going to find you in contempt.
Well, the court may be finding me in contempt pretty soon anyway because I'm finding the court's rulings astonishingly biased.
Are you inviting the court to find you in contempt because you're indicating you're going to do contemptuous things?
No, I'm just saying there's only so much unfairness one can bear.
Well,
And
counsel,
I can't
if
promise
you-
that I can't do it.
If you feel that you are going to be unable to behave professionally in a non-contemptuous fashion, we'll deal with that very effectively and deal with you and your conduct, and it is not going to work to the benefit of you or your client.
I understand that, Your Honor. We do the best we can to...
Well, you had better behave professionally. I'm warning you at this time. Is that clear?
I heard you. Yes, indeed, sir.
It's something the court will take seriously if you misbehave.
I'm sure you will.
All right, then be in recess, and you've heard what the court had to say.
Yes.
After watching this part of the trial, I actually couldn't watch the trial for a couple days because his behavior irritated me so much that I just couldn't even focus on it. I was so angry, and it just, for me, it's like this is just another example of these boys getting railroaded by the system. But I wanted to put that in because I wanted you guys to see what I'm talking about or referencing, because I do often tell you that this judge is very biased and treats defense completely, it is just like completely different from prosecution. So here is an example of him pointing Miss Abramson out and belittling her in front of the entire court. As he always does, he never addresses any of this stuff at sidebar or in private. He always makes it a point to humiliate her in front of everybody. But I'm so glad that Miss Abramson stood up to him and said, you know, like there's only so much unfairness one person can bear. Like everybody sees this except for himself. I guess he thought he was sly about it, but unfortunately, it is his courtroom and he gets to do whatever he wants. I just want to make sure I put that in there for you guys to see. If you're already a subscriber and not getting notified when I upload these videos, make sure you go to my page and select the bell icon so that way you will be notified. With that, have a good night, everybody. Bye.